Hello my friends and welcome to Crimes with Cole. So how are you guys doing today? I hope you all are having an amazing day. In today's case, we will be talking about the horrific case of Katie Beer. And just as a warning, this is a pretty intense case in my opinion. And while it ended happily for Katie and has given the word hope meaning, the torment and suffering this little girl had to endure was just awful. Katie Beer was born on December 28th, 1982 in New York. She lived with her mother, Marilyn, and her older half-brother, John, in Long Island. Marilyn was extremely neglectful of her two children and would constantly leave them in the care of their godmother, Linda, and her husband, Sal, who lived in Bay Shore. And while under the care of Linda and Sal, Katie endured physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. And in a time where these types of crimes were unspoken of, did not mean that they weren't happening. Katie says that all during her childhood, these types of abuse were happening to her regularly at the hands of Sal, the one who's supposed to be taking care of her. Frequently at the household of Linda and Sal, Katie became very familiar with their neighbor, John Espistado. I might have butchered that. Who happened to not have the best record with kids. John had pled guilty to the attempted abduction of a 7-year-old boy in a shopping mall back in 1978 to avoid prison time. This was 4 years before Katie was born. So you'd assume Linda and Sal was aware of their neighbor's criminal past, therefore taking precautions. And while they may have been aware of this horrible crime, this did not stop Linda and Sal from being friendly with John and inviting John over to their house, giving Katie another predator to prey on her. John, who was 43, was a contractor and lived in his family home. He had built himself an apartment above the garage that sat a few yards from the main house. John liked to describe himself as the big brother type, always inviting the young kids on the block to hang out at his apartment garage and, you know, play video games, eat snacks, junk food, drink pop all day, you know, things that mom and dad would tell you to lay off of. So Katie hanging out there was not a huge surprise to anyone that knew them. John had built a dungeon in the garage, and it hid behind a movable bookshelf, and it had a 200-pound concrete trap door. It entailed a 6-foot-long tunnel entrance. And at the end of the tunnel was a room that was 6 by 7, if you want to call it a room. And inside of this space, this room he created, was a small coffin-sized soundproofed area that had a TV and a bed in it. And he also had a toilet in this little room area that he had created and a CCTV system. And he created this all years prior to kidnapping Katie. That's pretty scary. On December 26th, 2 days before Katie's 10th birthday, John had promised her some birthday gifts that were back at his apartment. So Katie follows John back to his place, and when she got there, he forced her down the 6-foot-long tunnel into the small dugout room that consisted of dirt walls and no sunlight. Imagine you're 10 years old and your 43-year-old neighbor forces you to crawl down a dirt tunnel. So you're army crawling down this tunnel with your shoulders scraping the walls, dirt and dust getting in your face. It's dark and it's cold. You don't know what's at the end of the tunnel. And even worse, you don't know why you're having to crawl down this tunnel. And even if you wanted to get out, you couldn't. Because a 200-pound concrete trap door lies at the opening that you were just forced to get in. Once Katie was trapped in her new designated dungeon, John had to find a way to make it appear Katie had gone missing, because he was the last person she was seen with. So John had made a recording of Katie, walked down to the arcade just a few blocks, called Linda on the payphone across from the arcade, and then played the recording, making it seem like Katie had been kidnapped. Once he was done, he hung up the phone and he hurried into the arcade. John told police that he and Katie had gone to the arcade. Katie loved playing the games there, and her birthday was soon, so he decided to take her to the arcade, and she got kidnapped. And while John was helping the community search for Katie by day, by night, he was in the dirt dungeon sexually assaulting Katie. Katie spent 16 days in the bunker John had built. He would bring her pop and junk food, lots of candy to keep her full. She barely slept. And as exhausting as it was for her to scream and bang on the walls of what she was enclosed with, no one ever knew or heard any commotion. John told Katie how he wanted to keep her down there forever. And when she was old enough, he wanted to marry and have children with her. And while all of this sounded great to John, Katie was quick to question his plan he had, making him second guess his entire plot. The police were extremely suspicious of John because of his past, and also because the phone call was missing background noise. Experts later would say it made it very obvious that it was a recording. There were also no witnesses that saw them at the arcade. However, they noticed John arriving alone when he did come later, right after the phone call was placed. But certainly no one saw a little girl get snatched up. And per John's attorney, on January 13th, 1993, John confessed to the crime and led police to this bunker where Katie had been for 16 days. He pled guilty to kidnapping on June 16th, 1994, and was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. 10 pending charges, including sexual abuse and child endangerment, were dropped in exchange for the plea. Sal was also charged for his own abuse he had inflicted upon Katie before the kidnapping ever happened, and was sentenced to 12 years in prison for sexual abuse. Katie went to live with a loving foster family in East Hampton and considers them her family now. She went off to college and graduated with a business degree and found love and got married. She allowed her foster dad to give her away. And she also has 2 children who call her foster parents Grandma and Grandpa. Just warms my heart. Although Katie's childhood was awful and horrific, she now spends time in her adult years sharing her story to others, educating them and bringing awareness to situations similar to hers. This is a great story to really instill hope in those who have lost it, in my opinion. And to know that you don't always have to be a statistic. You can be the exception like Katie. What do you guys think? Is this not a rewarding yet scary story for a 10-year-old to have to endure that type of not only physical pain and torture, but mentally having to outwit her kidnapper, knowing that the family that was caring for her was friends with them and right next door? I'm glad she's using her trauma for good and is open to sharing her story to help others. But let me know what you guys think. Were you anywhere near as mentally strong as Katie when you were her age? And until next time, please remember to be safe, and I will see you then. Bye!